Okay friends, to get started on our job, one of the first things we have to do is remove all 5 of our lug nuts and then remove the wheel. Let's move along to removing the bracket for our brake hose. Next, we're going to remove the axle nut right here. What you might notice if you're working with hand tools is as you try to loosen this is going to try to spin. If you have this closer to the ground, you could take a nice pry bar, come across your lug studs without damaging them, put it down to the ground, and that's going to help prevent this from spinning. With that said, let's remove our axle nut. A little bit of penetrant. Now we're going to use a punch and a hammer, come right in through the center here and break this free. If that doesn't work, commonly people will use an air chisel. Remove your locking cotter pin and then remove the nut. Leave this on a couple threads, give this a couple loving bonks, break it free. Go ahead and remove this nut, and then we're going to break it free. Keep in mind, this thing could potentially come down, possibly hurt you, and even if you don't have this separated properly, you might put a tug on your axle. Leave that on there a couple threads. Let's give it a couple loving bonks. Let's go ahead and separate this. Let's continue on with this bottom bolt right here. Now let's remove the sway bar link. To do that, if you look in the center, you can see an area that you should be able to fit an Allen head socket into. While holding that, you would just reverse this nut right here to remove it. Commonly, the center is stripped out, so I'm just going to use some locking pliers. Now on the back side here, you just want to make sure you pay attention not to damage the boot. Mine has a little lip that I can grab onto. Slide this out of the way. The next thing we're going to do is remove this right here, which is the bracket for our ABS wire. Now up inside the engine compartment, you're going to find your strut tower. There's going to be 3 mounting nuts that hold the strut to the body. Do not touch this center nut. Now for this last one, keep in mind this is the only thing holding up the strut, so I'm going to reach inside the wheel well, hold on to it, and then we can remove our last nut. Let's go ahead and remove this bolt right here, and then we're going to carefully let this down, being very careful not to damage our axle boot along the way. At this point, we're going to have clear access to be able to remove both of our bolts. I'll do this one first, and then I can slide this out of the way and remove the other side. Keep in mind, once you loosen this one, the control arm is going to fall down a little bit. There it is, friends. All right, it's time to get ready to install our brand new upper control arm. The 2 bolts that we removed for the upper control arm, let's go ahead and make sure we use a little bit of red thread locker on these. Slide it right in here. Once you have it in, start in both of your bolts. Now that we have both of the bolts started, we're going to go ahead and snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 41 foot-pounds. One last thing to pay attention to is once you start getting ready to torque this down, you want to make sure you have it at the approximate level as if the vehicle was sitting on the ground, not like this. Now let's get the strut lined up with the body again. I like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these studs before I start my nuts. Let's put in this lower bolt. Let's snug this up and then torque it to 76 foot-pounds. Now we're going to get ready to line up the upper ball joint with our knuckle again. Start the nut right on there. Now that we have that snug, let's continue on down to the outer tie rod end. Go ahead and put that in. We'll start the nut on there and torque it. Now let's torque this to 35 foot-pounds. And let's also torque the upper ball joint nut to 35 foot-pounds. Go ahead and install a cotter pin on this. Let's reattach the ABS wire bracket. Reattach your flex hose bracket. Let's put on our axle nut and bottom it out. I put a bar going across my lug studs right here, being very careful not to damage the threads, but the reason why I did it is because I want to make sure that this doesn't turn while I torque it to 189 foot-pounds. Once you have your axle nut torqued, the next thing that you need to do is lock it in. I'm just going to use a punch. I'm going to come right inside this area here and pin it over. Now let's get our sway bar link back on here. If it doesn't seem like it lines up, just go ahead and take a pry bar, carefully pry down, slide it in. Now let's torque this to 31 foot-pounds. Now we can go ahead and put the wheel on here. We'll start all the lug nuts on, snug them up, get the wheel on the ground, and then torque the lug nuts to 98 foot-pounds. Torqued. All right, now that we have the wheel torqued and everything back on the ground, we can continue on by snugging these up and then torquing them to 66 foot-pounds. Okay friends, we got our control arm in there. What's left to do now? You're going to take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop.